What if a call from the past could change your future forever? Sarah's discovery of an old rotary phone in her grandmother's attic seemed like an innocent find, until it rang. On the other end was a voice she never expected to hear, her brother Ethan, who had been lost to her years ago. As she digs deeper into her family's dark history, she uncovers secrets that were meant to stay buried. What sinister forces are at play? And what truth will Sarah uncover as she answers the mysterious calls? Stay with us as we unravel this chilling tale. Trust me, you won't want to miss a second.
Behind the doors.
The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of her grandmother's old house, casting dancing patterns of light on the wooden floor. Sarah wandered through the attic, a space that had always seemed like a labyrinth of forgotten memories. The furniture covered in white sheets resembled ghosts of a past she barely knew. As she explored the shelves of dusty boxes, her fingers brushed against an unusual object. It was an old rotary phone, with peeling paint and a tangled cord. A sudden curiosity overcame her. What stories could this phone tell? "What are you doing, Sarah?" asked her friend Lisa, who had accompanied her on the visit. She stood in the doorway of the attic, watching her friend with a mix of skepticism and interest. "Look at this, Lisa. It's an old phone. Who still uses this?" Sarah replied, holding up the device like it was a newly discovered treasure. "Maybe you should leave it here. It could be full of ghosts," Lisa joked, but Sarah's expression was serious. "I want to take it home. It could be fun to try and use it," Sarah insisted, tucking the phone under her arm. After they descended the stairs and left the attic behind, Sarah couldn't get the phone out of her mind. As soon as they arrived at her house, she placed the phone on the living room table and stared at it, as if waiting for it to speak. The clock on the wall ticked away the hours, and the silence in the house seemed to grow louder. "Are you really going to try and use it?" Lisa asked, taking a hesitant step towards the table. "Of course. Why not? It could be interesting," Sarah responded, feeling a wave of excitement and fear at the same time. She turned the dial, listening to the familiar sound of the mechanism, and as she pressed the call button, only silence answered her. The phone was dead. A bit disappointed, she was about to give up when suddenly the phone started ringing. The sound was sharp and insistent, as if someone on the other end was desperately trying to reach her. "What was that?" Lisa exclaimed, looking around in disbelief. "I don't know, but I'm going to answer it," Sarah said, her heart racing. She lifted the receiver, and as she did, a familiar voice echoed from the other end of the line. "Sarah?" The world around her stopped. Sarah's heart pounded and her eyes widened. It was the voice of Ethan, her brother, who she had tragically lost years ago. The memory of his smile and laughter flooded her mind, and a mix of joy and horror took hold of her. "Ethan, is that you?" Her voice came out trembling, almost like a whisper. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me." The voice was soft, but there was an urgency that sent a shiver down her spine. How is this possible? You're dead," Sarah stammered, struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. "I know, but there are things you don't know, things happening now that you need to understand." Lisa was watching with wide eyes, unable to process what was happening. The atmosphere in the room seemed to change, as if the air was charged with electricity. Sarah, still gripping the phone tightly, felt a wave of conflicting emotions: hope, fear, and deep sadness. "Ethan, what do you mean? What happened?" she questioned, her voice more steady now. "You need to find out the truth. The house, our family, is in danger. Don't trust anyone." The call abruptly ended, and the ensuing silence was deafening. Sarah sat down, the phone still swinging in her hand. What had she just heard? Was it a hallucination? A cruel trick of her mind? "Sarah, what was that?" Lisa broke through her thoughts, approaching cautiously. I don't know. Ethan. He was here." Sarah stammered, her mind spinning as she tried to piece together what had just happened. The phone now quiet, looked like an ordinary object, but for Sarah, everything had changed. She felt that somehow she was about to enter a world she never imagined, a world filled with secrets and hidden truths that her family had kept for a long time. Sarah was paralyzed, the phone still close to her ear, Ethan's voice reverberating in her mind like a distant echo. This can't be happening, she thought, feeling almost dizzy. Her heart was racing, and the mix of disbelief and hope left her in a state of confusion. "Are you a ghost?" a part of her whispered, while the other refused to accept the possibility. She dropped the receiver as if touching it made her part of something she didn't understand. She sat on the cold attic floor, surrounded by dusty boxes and objects from a distant era. The silence was oppressive, and every shadow seemed to move, dancing with an eerie tone. Sarah took a deep breath and decided she needed to understand how this was possible. "Maybe it's just an illusion," she murmured to herself, trying to calm the storm of thoughts invading her mind. Sarah's grandmother's house had always been a place of stories and legends. From a young age, she had heard about the connections beyond life that her grandmother mentioned with a gleam in her eyes. "Life doesn't end with death, dear," her grandmother would say, while telling tales of spirits visiting their loved ones. "Sometimes they need something, and we can help them." Now those words seemed darker than ever. Determined to learn more, Sarah stood up and walked to the attic door. The stairs creaked under her weight, and as she descended, she felt a chill on the back of her neck. Every corner of the house seemed to be watching, as if the walls held secrets that were about to be revealed. When she entered the living room, she noticed the light from the window flickering, creating dancing shadows. "This isn't normal," she thought, feeling a shiver down her spine. "Sarah?" Her mother's voice echoed from the hallway, breaking the unsettling silence. "Are you okay? What were you doing in the attic?" I found an old phone," she replied, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "I think it belonged to Grandma." "Oh, that old phone," her mother said with a forced smile. She always believed there was something special about it. "Did you know it could work?" Sarah asked, the curiosity now burning in her chest. Her mother hesitated, looking out the window as if expecting to see something outside. "No, I didn't know, but maybe some mysteries are better left in the past." Her mother's evasive answer left Sarah uneasy, but she didn't want to press her at that moment. Instead, she decided to investigate on her own. With a determined look, she headed for her grandmother's room, where there was an old desk full of yellowed papers and old books. As she rummaged through the drawers, her fingers found a diary. The worn leather and dusty details indicated the item had been well used over the years. When she opened it, the pages were filled with notes about the family, stories, and, to her surprise, references to something her grandmother called the secret. Is this what she wanted to hide? She thought, her heart racing as she read. One passage caught her attention. Some connections are not just about love, but about need. The world of the dead can communicate with the living, but caution is needed. There are those who do not wish to be forgotten. Sarah frowned, her hands trembling slightly. What does this mean? She whispered, as a cold breeze passed through the window, making the curtains flutter as if something was moving through them. She continued to flip through the diary, each word seeming like a key opening doors to a past she didn't know. The shadows in the house seemed to writhe, as if responding to her discoveries. "Ethan," she called softly, not knowing if she was hoping for him to appear or if his presence was already surrounding her in some way. The night dragged on, and the strange occurrences that began to affect the house made her uneasy. The wind whispered through the cracks, and the lights flickered in an almost hypnotic rhythm. Sarah felt that something was about to happen, something that would irrevocably connect her to her brother and the mystery surrounding him. Courage began to grow within her, even in the face of fear. "I will discover the truth," she decided in a whisper, not knowing that this decision would lead her down a dark path full of revelations. Sarah sat at a table in the back of the library, surrounded by dusty shelves that seemed to hold secrets from ancient times. The fluorescent light above her flickered, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere that made her heart race. She had decided she couldn't just ignore the mysterious call she had received. Ethan's voice still echoed in her mind, and the urgency to discover the truth drove her forward. With a notebook and pen in hand, Sarah began to leaf through some old documents spread across the table. The smell of aged paper and the soft sound of pages turning calmed her a bit, though the unease continued to stir within her. As she read, her eyebrows furrowed when she found mentions of several families in the area who had lost loved ones in inexplicable ways. What intrigued her most was a record of a local cult that, according to the yellowed pages, performed rituals to keep spirits in contact with the living. "This can't be real," she murmured to herself as her hands trembled touching the sheets. What else could be behind that quiet town? The library was silent, except for the sound of her pencil scratching the paper. Sarah noted down the references and details that seemed relevant, but soon her attention was diverted by a cold draft that passed by her, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The light above her flickered again, and a shiver ran down her spine. "Hello? Is anyone here?" she called, her voice weaker than she had expected. The silence that followed was deafening. She decided it was best to head home. The feeling of being watched was growing more intense, and the idea of being alone in the library left her anxious. As she got up, she noticed the environment seemed darker, as if the shadows had drawn closer. Sarah hurried toward the exit, almost tripping over her own legs. As soon as she reached the parking lot, she got in her car and started the engine, anxiety consuming her. As she drove through the quiet streets, Sarah's mind was racing. Images of Ethan, his smile and childhood memories flooded her thoughts. The previous call was still fresh in her memory, and she wondered if there was any real chance her brother was indeed contacting her. When she arrived home, the phone rang again, breaking the silence that surrounded her. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated for a moment, but she couldn't ignore it. She answered with a trembling voice. "Hello? Sarah?" Ethan's familiar voice echoed through the receiver, a sound that brought a mixture of relief and terror. "You need to listen to what I have to say." "Ethan, where are you? How is this possible?" Sarah almost shouted, adrenaline coursing through her body. "Are you okay? I don't have time to explain everything, but you need to understand something's wrong. They're coming after me, and you're not safe either." His voice was filled with an urgency that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Who's coming? What do you mean by that?" Desperation began to creep into her tone. "Ethan, please. You need to find out the truth about that night. The dark figure, it's still here. There's more than you imagine. Trust me, and don't tell anyone you heard from me. Don't trust anyone," he said, and the line went silent. Sarah was in shock, the phone slipping from her hands as she tried to process what she had just heard. The conversation left her in a state of confusion and fear, and the idea that something deeper and more sinister was happening consumed her. What should she do now? Ethan's words echoed in her mind, and she knew she was about to cross a line that could change everything. The afternoon light filtered through Sarah's bedroom window, casting dancing patterns on the wooden floor. The open diary before her seemed to pulse with secrets, and the atmosphere was heavy with palpable tension. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her heart still racing from her last conversation with Ethan. His voice echoed in her mind, mingling with the blurry images of her past. It was as if a shadow had settled in her soul, obscuring her most cherished memories. "You need to know the truth, Sarah," Ethan's voice echoed in her mind. The dark figure was there, and it didn't let me go. She closed her eyes, trying to organize the thoughts tumbling through her head. Part of her wanted to believe it was all just a hallucination, a delusion caused by stress and grief. But another part, deeper and instinctive, knew there was more, something that couldn't be ignored. Determined, Sarah got up and went to the kitchen, where her mother was preparing dinner. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, but seeing her mother's pale, tired face brought a new knot of worry to the young woman's chest. "Mom," Sarah began, trying to stay calm. Can we talk about Ethan? Her mother stopped stirring the pot, her body tense like a rope about to snap. Sarah, this isn't the time for that, she replied, avoiding her daughter's gaze. Frustration grew within Sarah. But I heard his voice, Mom. He said there was a dark figure chasing him the night he died. I need to understand what happened. Her mother's expression hardened, and a heavy silence fell between them. Sarah saw tears welling up in her mother's eyes, and once again, the young woman felt powerless in the face of that sadness. Please don't insist on this, her mother implored, her voice trembling. It's better to leave the past in the past. How can you say that? Sarah exclaimed, her voice rising. He's my brother. What if there's something you haven't told me? Something that could help me understand. I can't just ignore this. Her mother took a deep breath, the internal struggle visible on her face. Sarah, some things are better left forgotten. No matter what you heard, the Ethan you knew isn't here anymore. Let him rest. Frustrated, Sarah turned away, feeling as if she were hitting an impenetrable wall. She needed answers, but her mother's resistance left her without options. As she walked back to her room, something made her stop. The diary was open to a specific page, as if someone had read it recently. It was impossible that her mother had read it, wasn't it? With her heart racing, she approached the table and looked at the words written. It was a passage about the night Ethan died, where her grandmother mentioned a sacrifice and a protector. A cold chill ran down her spine, and the idea that her family harbored dark secrets terrified her. Why didn't you tell me this, Grandma? She murmured, her voice low and trembling. The weight of the revelation made her feel light and heavy at the same time. Her mind buzzed with questions. What did that sacrifice mean? And who was the dark figure? Determined not to let the conversation with her mother be the end, Sarah grabbed the old phone and sat on the floor of her room, the diary beside her. She needed to speak with Ethan again. Fear consumed her, but the need to discover the truth was stronger. With trembling fingers, she dialed the familiar number and listened to the dial tone echoing alone in the quiet room. Hello? The familiar voice made her shudder. It was as if a wave of longing and pain washed over her. Sarah, did you hear me? Yes, Ethan. I need to know more about the figure. What happened that night? A tense silence followed. Sarah could feel his hesitation. It wasn't just any spirit. It was something that wanted to take me, something that's connected to our family. You have to be careful, Sarah. It might be after you too. His words cut her like a knife. Why didn't you tell me this before? What do you mean, connected to our family? Ethan! Her voice was almost desperate. Please don't leave me like this. I need to know. The call abruptly ended, as if someone had hung up. Sarah sat there, the phone in her hands, her heart pounding and her mind full of unanswered questions. What did it all mean? And how did the dark figure fit into her life? She looked at the open diary, feeling like she was on the verge of discovering something much bigger than she imagined. The weight of family secrets was becoming unbearable, and with that, Sarah realized she was one step away from uncovering truths that could not only change her life, but also her family's history forever. Sarah was a bundle of nerves, her heart pounding as if it were about to leap from her chest. The idea of holding a seance in her own home left her uneasy, but the need for answers drove her forward. She sat at the living room table, where the soft light of a lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls. Beside her, her friend Clara arranged the materials they had brought: candles, a Ouija board, and a crystal that Clara said would help channel the energies. Are you sure you want to do this? Clara asked, her voice low and worried. It could be dangerous. I need to know what's going on, Sarah replied, determined. Ethan needs me. I can't stay in the dark. Clara nodded, though apprehension was still visible on her face. Once everything was ready, the two sat at the table, lighting the candles and placing their hands on the Ouija board. The air seemed denser, as if an invisible force was gathering around them. If anyone is here with us, show us a sign, Clara said, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The candles flickered, and a cold wind blew through the room, making the flames dance with intensity. "Let's begin," Sarah said, her voice firm despite the fear. "Ethan, if you can hear me, please manifest yourself." After a few moments of silence, the lights began to flicker, and the room grew even colder. Then, with unexpected softness, the planchette on the board moved. The two exchanged surprised and frightened glances. The planchette slowly slid to form the word HELLO. "Ethan?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Are you here?" "Yes." Ethan's voice echoed in Sarah's mind, clear as crystal, though she didn't hear it physically. "Sarah, I'm here." She closed her eyes, feeling a wave of emotions wash over her. "What's happening? What do you mean by the dark figure? Who is she?" "She's still after me," Ethan replied, his voice filled with pain. "And she's connected to our family. I'm not the only one stuck between worlds." The revelation made Sarah's heart race. "Stuck? What do you mean by that? How can I help you?" "You need to understand the truth about the night I died. There are things our mother never told us. She's afraid of what you might discover." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Sarah asked, feeling the frustration grow. "I didn't know you were in danger." "I didn't know how. The dark figure, she feeds on fear. You have to confront her, Sarah. Only then can I rest." The table shook slightly and the candles flickered as if a storm was brewing around them. Visions began to flood Sarah's mind, fragments of her childhood, moments she had blocked out. She saw herself as a little girl playing in the yard, laughing beside Ethan. But amid the smiles, dark images emerged, a hooded figure watching, the light fading, a muffled scream. "Sarah!" Clara exclaimed, snapping her out of her trance. "What's happening?" I see things," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. "Things I shouldn't remember." "You need to focus. Ask him about the figure," Clara suggested, trying to remain calm. "Ethan, who is this figure? What do you know about her?" Sarah asked, her mind buzzing with concern. "She's closer than you think," Ethan said, his voice growing weaker, as if he was struggling against an invisible force. "She is someone you know very well." The revelation made Sarah's stomach turn. "What do you mean by that? Who is it?" But before she could hear the answer, the room's light flickered violently, and everything around her went dark. The silence was broken only by a familiar sound, the ringing of a phone. Sarah looked at Clara, fear etched on their faces. "It's the phone," Clara said hesitantly. "Are you going to answer it?" I have to answer it," Sarah murmured, her heart beating so hard it felt like it might burst. With trembling hands, she got up and walked to the phone, her body carrying the weight of a revelation that consumed her. As she lifted the receiver, Ethan's voice echoed again, but now there was an urgency she couldn't ignore. "Sarah," the voice came from the other side, dark and loaded with warning. "You need to listen." The night was shrouded in an almost palpable silence as Sarah sat in the living room, the old phone resting on the table before her like an artifact from a dark past. The air was heavy, laden with a sense of anticipation, as she tried to process the last call she had received from Ethan. Her heart beat erratically, and her mind swirled with questions. How could he still be alive? What really happened that fateful night? The dim light from the lamp flickered, and she remembered Ethan's words. "I'm not alone, Sarah." That phrase echoed in her mind, and a cold wave ran down her spine. The phone rang again. She hesitated for a moment, but the need for answers outweighed the fear. She picked up, and the voice that came through the receiver was different, deeper, and darker. "Sarah," the voice began, but it wasn't Ethan's. The tone was familiar, but something was off. "You can't escape this. The truth is closer than you think." "Who are you?" Sarah forced out, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "Where is Ethan?" "He's here, but not in the way you think. You need to understand, Sarah. What happened wasn't an accident." Your mother did what she did to protect you and the family. Sarah's heart raced. What do you mean by that? Go down to the basement and find the truth. The answer is hidden in the shadows of the past. Suspicious but driven by the need to understand, Sarah hung up and stood. The house was eerily quiet, as if it were waiting for an imminent event. She descended the stairs leading to the basement, the light in the hallway flickering as if it were trying to warn her about what was coming. When she reached the basement door, she hesitated. The voice's words echoed in her mind, mingled with memories of her childhood and the fear of what she might find. When she finally opened the door and took the first step, a musty smell and old wood surrounded her. Each step she took echoed like a dark call. The basement was a labyrinth of dusty boxes and furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts of a forgotten past. Her attention was drawn to an old chest in a dark corner. With effort, she dragged the chest closer to the light and began to open it. Inside, she found yellowed documents, faded photos, and objects that belonged to Ethan. Her heart tightened when she saw a small toy he used to carry. But there was something more, a diary, its pages worn but still legible. As she opened it, the first sentence made her blood run cold. The sacrifice must be made to keep the family united. No, this can't be, she murmured, fighting against denial. This can't be true. The memory of the conversation with her mother invaded her mind. Her mother's look, the fear, the refusal to talk. Sarah felt a growing anger mixed with deep sadness. She decided it was time to confront her mother. With the diary in hand, she quickly climbed the stairs. The house was still silent, but the tension in the air was almost unbearable. She found her mother in the kitchen, looking out the window as if she were waiting for someone. Her mother's face slowly turned, and Sarah saw the fear in her eyes. "Sarah, you shouldn't be here," her mother said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know more than you think," Sarah replied, holding the diary firmly. "Ethan didn't die by accident. He was sacrificed, wasn't he?" Her mother's expression changed and tears began to flow. "I did what I thought was right. It was the only way to protect you." Protect or hide the truth? Sarah felt the anger growing, but also a sense of despair. "You need to tell me everything." Her mother took a deep breath, as if preparing to share a burden. "There was a cult. They believed that the sacrifice of a loved one would ensure the family's safety. I didn't want you to know, didn't want you to carry this weight." "But I need to know, and so does Ethan," Sarah insisted. "He's trapped between worlds, and I can't leave him like this." "You don't understand. The voice you heard isn't his. It's an entity that feeds on pain and grief. You need to stop using that phone." Sarah hesitated, the revelation hitting her like a blow. "So all of this was a trap?" "Yes. You're in danger, and I can't lose you too." Her mother's voice was pleading, but Sarah was conflicted. The truth about Ethan, about the family, was unfolding before her, and the choice weighed on her heart. "I need to free him," she decided, determination taking over. "I'm going to use the phone again and confront this entity. I can't let another family member be trapped because of an evil ritual." "Sarah, please," her mother begged, but Sarah was already resolved. "It's done," she said, turning to leave the kitchen. Fate awaited her, and she couldn't turn back now. The phone was calling, and with it, the hope of finally bringing the truth to light.